For years, the European Union has operated under a carefully constructed illusion of invincibility. The narrative was simple. Brussels speaks and the member states listen. The hierarchy was clear, with the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, sitting comfortably at the apex of power. But what happens when that voice is challenged, not by shouting, but by a calculated, impenetrable silence? We are witnessing a shift in the tectonic plates of European power that the mainstream observers are desperate to ignore. The recent confrontation between Viktor Orbán and Ursula von der Leyen was not just a political disagreement, it was a stress test of the entire institutional architecture, and the architecture failed. Why does this matter right now? Because the European Union is currently navigating its most precarious period in decades. From the economic stagnation in the industrial heartlands to the escalating pressures on the eastern borders, the system requires absolute unity to function. Von der Leyen's authority relies entirely on the perception that she commands the room. That perception has evaporated. When Viktor Orbán, utilizing the platform of the Hungarian presidency, effectively neutralized the Commission's narrative dominance, he proved that the Queen of Europe has no clothes. The atmosphere in Brussels has shifted from bureaucratic routine to existential anxiety. The silence that fell over the proceedings wasn't a pause, it was a vacuum. Politics abhors a vacuum, and historically, when the center cannot hold, the periphery takes over. This moment signifies that the traditional tools of coercion, funding cuts, legal threats, and moral lectures have lost their potency. The Commission is accustomed to dictating terms to Budapest. Now, for the first time, we are seeing Budapest dictate the tempo to Brussels. This is the context you need to understand. The old rules of engagement have been suspended. We are no longer watching a debate. We are watching a hostile takeover of the political narrative.
To understand the severity of this silence, we must analyze the mechanics of the maneuver. This was not a chaotic outburst or an emotional tantrum. It was a surgical strike against institutional legitimacy. Viktor Orbán did not need to raise his voice to corner the Commission president. He simply needed to leverage the procedural power of the Council presidency against the rhetorical power of the Commission. The turning point occurred when the standard script was flipped. Usually, von der Leyen presents the agenda and member states react. This time, the reaction preceded the agenda, freezing the Commission in its tracks. The trap was laid in the details of the protocol. By focusing on uncomfortable realities, economic competitiveness, the failure of migration pacts, and the shifting geopolitical winds, Orbán forced a binary choice upon the Commission leadership: engage and legitimize his critique, or stay silent and look weak. Von der Leyen chose the latter, or perhaps she had no choice at all. This is the silence on the world stage that has rattled the establishment. It was a visual confirmation of a lack of answers. When a leader refuses to engage with a challenger on the open floor, it signals to every other observer that the challenger holds the high ground. This development is critical because it exposes a tactical deficit in Brussels. The Commission is built for consensus, not combat. Orbán, conversely, thrives in conflict. He utilized the spotlight not to seek approval, but to expose the limitations of the current leadership. The silence was the sound of a narrative hitting a brick wall. It demonstrated that in the face of a sovereign leader who refuses to be shamed by moralistic framing, the Commission has no plan B. The maneuver was calm, it was legal, and it was devastatingly effective. It stripped away the veneer of diplomatic nicety and revealed the raw power struggle beneath.
The immediate consequence of this standoff is not just a bruised ego, it is a systemic infection of doubt. In high-stakes geopolitics, authority is a currency. Once it is devalued, inflation sets in rapidly. By forcing Ursula von der Leyen into a defensive crouch, Orbán has signaled to other capitals and to the global markets that the leadership in Brussels is compromised. If the president cannot effectively counter a challenge from a single member state, how can she be expected to negotiate with superpowers like China or the United States? The credibility gap is widening in real time. We are already seeing the ripple effects. The cordon sanitaire, the political firewall meant to isolate dissenting voices, is crumbling. Other leaders who were previously hesitant to criticize the Commission's green policies or foreign strategies are now watching closely. They see that defiance comes with a lower price tag than previously thought. The silence in that chamber acts as a permission structure for dissent. It tells the opposition parties across the continent that the Commission is not an immovable object. The risk here is legislative paralysis. Major initiatives regarding the budget, defense integration, and enlargement require unanimity or broad consensus. That consensus is now held hostage by the new reality that the leadership can be stared down. Furthermore, this damages the EU's external projection of power. Diplomats thrive on stability and predictability. When the internal hierarchy of the European Union is visibly shaken, international partners lose faith in the bloc's ability to deliver on its promises. The silence of von der Leyen is being read in Moscow, Beijing, and Washington, not as diplomatic restraint, but as strategic paralysis. The danger is that the EU moves from being a global player to a global spectator, consumed by its own internal civil war while the world moves on without it.
Behind the scenes, the machinery of the European Union is grinding to a halt. This chapter of the crisis is about the failure of the institutional immune system. Typically, when a Commission president is challenged, the major political families, primarily the European People's Party, rally to restore order. They use procedural rules, media leaks, and backroom pressure to suffocate the rebellion. This time, the response has been disjointed and ineffective. The silence on the stage was mirrored by a lack of coordinated defense from the establishment parties. Why is the system failing to respond? Because the friction is no longer just political, it is structural. The conflict exposes the inherent flaw in the EU treaties, the tension between the supranational Commission and the Intergovernmental Council. Orbán is using the Council's prerogatives to check the Commission's ambition. We are witnessing a clash of legitimacies. Von der Leyen claims legitimacy from the European Parliament. Orbán claims legitimacy from the national electorate. In this specific confrontation, the national mandate proved to be the sharper weapon. The institutional response has been muted because there is no legal mechanism to silence a rotating presidency that operates within the boundaries of the treaties, however aggressively. This power dynamic creates a dangerous precedent. It suggests that the federalist momentum of the last decade has hit a hard limit. The institutions are designed to process compromise, not to resolve fundamental ideological conflicts. By refusing to play by the unwritten rules of Brussels etiquette, the Hungarian leadership has jammed the gears. The Commission is now in a defensive posture, reactive rather than proactive. They are spending their political capital trying to contain the internal damage rather than advancing their agenda. The establishment is paralyzed, waiting for a return to normalcy that may never come. What comes next is a stark binary outcome. There is no middle ground left. The era of muddling through, the classic European strategy of delaying crises with vague compromises, is over. The silence that Viktor Orbán forced upon Ursula von der Leyen has accelerated the timeline for a final confrontation. We are moving toward a moment where the European Union must decide what it actually is: a federal superstate that can discipline rogue members, or a loose confederation where national sovereignty reigns supreme. The ambiguity that allowed the EU to function for 30 years is gone. If von der Leyen cannot regain the narrative initiative, her second term will be defined by irrelevance. She risks becoming a lame duck president, presiding over a fractured institution while power flows back to the national capitals. This would mark the end of the geopolitical ambitions of the Commission. On the other hand, if the establishment attempts to forcefully crush this dissent through triggering extreme measures like Article 7 or stripping voting rights, they risk turning a political rebel into a martyr, potentially fracturing the Union permanently. The stakes could not be higher. This is the critical takeaway. The silence was not the end of the story, it was the starting gun for the battle of the EU's future. The coming months will see a brutal escalation. We will likely see budget vetoes weaponized, migration borders tightened unilaterally, and a paralysis of the legislative agenda. The illusion of unity is dead. The reality of power politics has returned to the continent. The question is no longer, can they get along?
The question is, who survives? The silence on the world stage was a warning. The storm is arriving now.